everyone. So we're headed for the Pesach Seder. And as always, the Pesach Seder presents a challenge, often for fathers, how to keep the interest of all the kids at the Seder, and sometimes even more difficult is how to keep the interest of the adults at the Seder. So what we're going to do this year is we're going to present stories that can be used at the Pesach Seder. I will suggest where to use them in the Haggadah, but they are free for anybody who wants to use them at any point. They could be as you go along. They could be during the Shulchan Orech section of the Seder when people are eating and you want to talk about something inspirational and something that may carry a lesson. And I'm going to present you with some various stories that I found are both either inspiring or they're interesting or combination of both. Before I start, first of all, I want to thank our professional video man, Rabbi Van, who has worked with us in the past. And if these videos have been successful in any way, then much of it is his credit. And I would also like to suggest, as I have in the past, that this is available for parents. There was something called the Haggadah Rhymes, which are a series of rhymes that I've compiled, put together for explaining as an entry point, explaining that I have 23 rhymes here on various points in the Seder. If anybody would be interested, these are available for purchase. You could email me at Dovid B. Kaplan, D-O-V-I-D, B as in baseball, basketball, badminton, busted bridges in Baltimore, Kaplan, K-A-P-L-A-N, and they are available for sale for purchase. You could email me again, Dovid B. Kaplan. And these are rhymes that are used as an entry point for parents or educators to then explain the concepts in the Haggadah. So, without further ado, I would start with Holach Ma'anya, where we talk about the bread of affliction. And when we read Holach Ma'anya, it says, quote, it concludes with Hashota Hacha. This year we are here. L'shana haba be'arad Yisrael. Next year we'll be in Eretz Yisrael. Hashota Avdei. This year we are servants. L'shana haba b'nei chorin. We'll be free people. This year we're slaves. By next year, hopefully we'll be free. And part of the idea here is, again, there are many ideas. I'm not going to go into that this time around. One of the ideas here is to instill us with hope that all situations in life could change. So, Rav Herzog, who is the chief rabbi of Israel, his wife became terminally ill, and the doctors gave her 2 weeks to live. And they went to the Chazon Ish to get a bracha, the famous Chazon Ish, and the Chazon Ish gave them a bracha. And within those 2 weeks, now there's a lady who had given 2 weeks to live by the doctors. Within those 2 weeks, antibiotics made their entrance on the market. Rebbetzin Herzog was treated. Whatever the illness was, the antibiotics were presented. She used the antibiotics, and then she lived, I think, for another 20 years. So it's never a point where a person should give up hope. There's another incident that took place where a couple living in Eretz Yisrael, I believe it was the Old City, it was Thursday night, and they had absolutely no money to make Shabbos purchases, and the two of them, the husband and the wife, were very distraught, and they were talking to each other, and at a certain point, they heard a shattering of glass in the back room. So they raced into the back room. A thief had broken into the house, and he pulled out a gun. He said, "Both of you get on your lie down. Don't you dare make a move." So the husband said to the thief, "Listen," he's lying on his face. He says, "Listen, if you're looking for money, you're in the wrong place." He said, "I'll decide, and don't you dare move." And he went around the house, and eventually he finished looking, and sure enough, he found nothing. Came back and started climbing out the window, and he said to the husband, "You're absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, I think you need this more than I do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of cash, and he threw it to the couple, and they had their Shabbos. Now, I don't recommend that as a form of hishtadlus, responsible hishtadlus, and effort into making parnasa. If somebody asks you, how are you going to make your parnasa? Well, we are going to leave our back window open, hoping for thieves. I don't recommend it, but often a situation may look hopeless, yet there is a Ribono Shalom who pulls us out of the depths of despair, and he's got many ways to do it. In the Belzer Hasidim came to Eretz Yisrael. They came to the land of Israel back in the 40s after the Holocaust. And the Belzer Rebbe, Rav Aaron from Belz, they were in Tel Aviv, and they were sitting at the Shalashudis, that they were sitting at the Tish with the Rebbe, and these were people who had just come out of the Holocaust. These people were survivors. And they said to the Rebbe, how could we possibly go on? How could we possibly, where's there hope for us? We've all shattered, broken, lost our families. How could we possibly go on? So the Belzer Rebbe of Arnfeld Belz, said to them, the Gemara says, the Talmud says, how do we know, where is there a source in the Talmud that there's going to be eventually a resurrection of the dead? And the Gemara says, one of the sources is when the Jewish people came to the Red Sea, and the sea split, and afterwards they sang a shira, Oz Yashir Moshe. Oz Yashir. And the Gemara explains the word Yashir is future tense. It should have said Oz Shar. Moshe sang. Why is it Oz Yashir? And the answer is that the word Yashir, future tense, indicates there will be in the future, there will be a shira, there will be a song. And we see from here that in the future there will be a resurrection of the dead, and Moshe Rabbeinu will be there to sing. Said the Belzer Rebbe to his followers, the Jewish people at Yam Suf, all of them anyone who was there, they had been in Egypt a few weeks earlier with the plague of darkness. And we're told that in the plague of darkness, 4/5 of the Jewish people died. That means all those people at the Red Sea, they had family members who died just 4 weeks earlier. How were they able to sing Oz Yashir? Said the Belzer Rebbe, because the same way that Oz Yashir indicates there will be a resurrection, there will be a Tchias HaMesim, those people who had lost their families, they were filled with the faith and the hope for Tchias HaMesim. That's how they were able to sing Oz Yashir. And therefore, we too can go on in spite of the losses that we've taken, because there is hope for the future. And the people said, Rabbeinu, Nicham Tanu, Nicham Tanu. You've comforted us. And finally, I had a Rebbe of mine who was once at the Western Wall, at the Kaisel, and a non-Jewish tourist saw him. She came up to him, she said, you're a rabbi, aren't you? He said, yes. Can I ask you, this is the location where the temple once stood, isn't it? He said, yes, it is. She said to him, can I ask you, are there going to be sacrifices here today? He said to her, well, as of right now, no, but perhaps later today. And that's the faith that we live with, and we know that any situation in life on a national level, on an individual level, it could come to a happy conclusion very quickly. The next section of the Haggadah we'd like to speak about is Avadim Hayinu. Now, Avadim Hayinu, we understand the Haggadah says that had Hashem not taken us out of Egypt, we would still be in Egypt today. That means it was impossible, absolutely impossible, to get out of Egypt. There was simply no way to get out. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about the redemption, and every year at the Pesach Seder, we acknowledge the fact that, nothing would have changed. I always compare it to an ice cube in a freezer. As long as the freezer is working, the ice cube is not going to dissolve. As long as we would have been in Egypt and the Egyptians would have been in power, we wouldn't have been able to leave, and certainly not as a nation walking out in broad daylight. And the lesson for us, obviously, is that nothing in life goes without what we call siyata d'shmaya. Siyata d'shmaya means we have to have Hashem's divine assistance in everything we do, whether it has to do with our parnasa, our livelihood, our children, finding a spouse, and so on and so forth. So there was a man in New York living in a distant suburb of New York, a very secular suburb, and he was involved in Jewish outreach. And this goes back about, I'm guessing about 25, 30 years ago. He sent out flyers, 350 flyers. They actually stuffed, in those days people used to go around door to door stuffing mailboxes. And he stuffed 350 flyers into various mailboxes. And advertising that anybody who's interested in learning something about Judaism, they're free to make contact with him. Out of 350 flyers, he got exactly 0 responses. Not one response. 6 months later, it was almost Pesach time, and he gets a phone call. The young man calls him up, and he says to him, some months back, I saw a flyer advertising Jewish education. I've never experienced a Pesach Seder. Is there something that you could do for me? One response out of 350 flyers, that young man today is an observant Jew with a Torah family. So you see that you could try, and unless HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps you out, nothing's going to happen. There was a very big Rav in Brisk. His name was Rav Simcha Zelig Rieger. Rav Simcha Zelig Rieger was the posek in Brisk. The Brisker Rav, first there was Rav Chaim Brisker, and then there was the Brisk Rav. They were the Rabbanim of the town. Rav Simcha Zelig Rieger was the posek who answered the day-to-day halachic questions that came up. A woman came to Rav Simcha Zelig Rieger, and she asked him a very, very complicated question. And he said to the lady, she's going to have to come back in a few hours. He has to research it. It's a very, very complicated halachic shaila, halachic question. And he told her to come back in a few hours. In the meantime, he left his home and he went to the mikveh. It was Erev Shabbos. On the way back from the mikveh, he saw there was a discarded page from some with obviously holy writing on it. There was a discarded page lying down on the ground. So he picked it up because he figured he's going to put it into the Geniza, into the Shemus, where you put away, where things, the holy writings have to be buried. He bent down and he picked up this paper and he started scanning it with his eyes. And he noticed that this was the exact question that she had asked him, which he needed to research. This question had been asked some 100 years earlier and was written up in one of the classics for him. And that page that he found on the ground had been torn out of that sefer, and he bent down and he picked it up, and he had the answer right there. That was classic siyata d'shmaya that a posek gets. That out of the clear, he finds an answer to that question. A man in Australia was carrying a sefer Torah. He had to transport a sefer Torah from Melbourne to Perth, which is on the other side of Australia. And so he's carrying the sefer Torah, and it's sefer Torah, when you're carrying it, you really can't put it in the baggage. You have to carry it and actually have to hold it the entire time. So he gets to the counter, and the lady at the counter immediately takes a look. She says, "Sir, you're not going to be able to carry that onto the plane. I'm going to have to take that and put it in the baggage." He said, "No, I'm not letting this out of my hands." So she started arguing with him. And at a certain point, she said, "Look, I'm not going to argue with you. You're going to go to the gate, and they're going to just take it away from you right away. So well, I'll deal with it." And so she gives him his boarding pass, and he goes to the gate. And as soon as he gets to the gate, the person at the gate says to him, "Sir, you cannot carry that onto the plane. You're going to have to give that to us, and we'll put it underneath." He says, "No, I'm not letting this out of my hands." They started arguing, and then the people at the gate said, "Listen, we're not going to argue with you. You're going to get on a flight. The cabin crew is certainly not going to let you sit there with that thing." He gets on the plane, and sure enough, as soon as he gets on, the cabin crew, all the members, they jump on him. "Sir, you have to give that to us. I'm not letting this out of my hands." They said, "Listen, we're not going to argue with you. We're going to call the captain." They called the captain out. The captain comes out of the cockpit. He walks over to the guy, takes a look, sees a sefer Torah. He says, "Wow, a sefer Torah. Put it up in the cockpit with me. I'll put it near my tefillin." It was the one observant pilot who flew for the Australian Airlines. And he took the sefer Torah and he put it in the cockpit. Then he flew it to Perth. So you see that the siyata d'shmaya, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu demonstrates clear divine assistance when under the strangest circumstances. Here's one that is really an inspirational story that can be used. It's just unbelievable. Documented incident that took place. There was a couple that was living on a left-wing secular anti-religious kibbutz here in Israel. And somehow, some way, something, don't know exactly how it happened, the couple decided to become Balei Tshuva. They became totally Torah observant, and they realized that as Torah observant Jews, they're not going to be able to remain on this kibbutz. So they left the kibbutz and they moved, of all places, to Mea Shearim. Now, anybody who's been in Israel, you know what Mea Shearim looks like. It's a hardcore Hasidic community, as frum as you could get. And this couple went all the way, the full 9 yards, and the husband, where the shtreimel, the wife covered her head, and everything you could possibly imagine. But they had one problem, and that was that the wife, who was in the habit of smoking cigarettes, she was an addicted smoker, and she couldn't stop, which is not the end of the world. The problem was she couldn't stop smoking on Shabbos either. And here you have a frum couple, religious couple, and the wife is smoking cigarettes on Shabbos. And, the husband's going out of his mind. She's going out of her mind, but she couldn't stop. It's a very, very powerful addiction. They didn't know what to do. So they went to Rabbi Yashiv Zatzal, the biggest posek in Klal Yisrael. They asked her, what do we do here? Rabbi Yashiv said, you have to check her yichus, check her pedigree, check to see if she's Jewish or not. So what's one thing got to do with it? Rabbi Yashiv said, you have to check her yichus. They checked and they found that her mother had had a reform conversion, which is not a valid conversion halachically, which means that the mother was not Jewish and that this woman was not Jewish. Ironically, a non-Jew is not allowed to observe Shabbos, so it turned out that by smoking on Shabbos, she was actually doing what a non-Jew should be doing. The problem was that she wasn't Jewish. And they assembled a Beis Din, and there was a conversion was done, and they remarried, and with the chuppah and a kedusha and everything else. And the very first Shabbos, after she became a full-fledged Jew, the craving to smoke cigarettes stopped. She had no craving whatsoever. She had no difficulty whatsoever. And she had no difficulty quitting to smoke altogether. So they went back to Rabbi Yashiv and said, was that Ruach HaKodesh? Was that Ruach HaKodesh? She said, it was not Ruach HaKodesh. So they said, well, how did you know that that's the issue? Rabbi Yashiv said, this couple, certainly the husband who was a full-fledged Jew, they made every effort to do what Hashem wants them to do. When a Jew makes an effort to do the Ratzon Hashem, to fulfill God's will, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give them Siyata Dishmaya. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to help them out. And they earned the divine assistance to find out that their marriage was then inappropriate marriage, and that they could go on and now live their lives as full Torah Jews. There's a medical organization in Israel, and again, I repeat, all of these stories that I'm telling you, they can be used all at once, and you could sprinkle them around, and you could use them, some, all, and none, however you would like to use them. I'm just presenting you stories that demonstrate now, so Siyata Dishmaya, and any time you want to save them for during the year for the Shabbos table, that's fine too. There is a medical organization in Eretz Yisrael. Everybody in Israel knows it, probably in America too. It's called Ezer Mitzion. Ezer Mitzion is a medical relief organization, possibly the biggest medical relief organization in the world. And it was founded and it's directed by a man named Rav Hananya Cholak. One day, Rav Cholak happened to be, he's generally not in the Ezer Mitzion main office, he's generally out in the field, helping people, checking with doctors and so on and so forth. And one day, Rabbi Cholak was out, happened to be in the office, and the phone rang. So he was the nearest one to the phone. He picked up the phone and answered the phone, and he hears an elderly lady's voice on the other end of the phone. He said, is this the director of Ezer Mitzion? He says, yes, it is. She goes, okay, good. I would like to donate $2 million to your organization, but I'm not willing to donate to an organization that wastes money on secretaries, knowing that the director is the one who answers the phone, that I'm willing to give to such an organization. So Rabbi Cholak started. He said, hey, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we actually we have more than one secretary because it's a very busy organization. I just happened to be here. She said, no. If you're answering the phone, that's the kind of organization that I want. And Ezer Mitzion then got a $2 million donation from this lady. And in spite of his efforts to convince her otherwise, they got a $2 million donation. Rabbi Cholak, who has dedicated his life to helping other people, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps him to help other people. There was a man in Israel named Rav Binyamin Teflinsky. Now, this is a story that goes back probably 100 years. He was a very poor Jew living in Eretz Yisrael. And he had to marry off his daughter. And he had no means, not even close. So he contacted one of the local yeshivas, and he asked them if they'd be willing to share some of their donors, contact information for their donors, which is not an uncommon situation. People want to get the donors. Well, the yeshivas all organizations, they're very protective over their donors. Whether they should be or not is a different issue. It could be they should have the faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could give money in many different ways. But whatever the case was, the head of this yeshiva, he looked through his file, and there was one guy who used to send him a token donation, $18 every year, not much. So he gave this Reb Teflinsky, he gave him this man's address in the United States. So that was it, the smallest donor from the yeshiva. Rabbi Teflinsky wrote the man a letter, and he sent the man a letter. What he didn't know, what nobody knew, this man had a daughter who was just been diagnosed with a severe illness. And the man made a pledge that the next request for a donation as a merit for his daughter, the next request for his donation, he is going to answer generously. So he gets this letter from Rabbi Teflinsky that says, I need a certain amount of money for my daughter's wedding. The man immediately wrote out a check and sent him the money that covered the entire wedding. So you see that, in life, the help could come in all sorts of funny ways. This I was told by the man himself. There was somebody who is in charge, an administrator in one of the yeshivas here in Eretz Yisrael. He runs the all of the logistics in the yeshiva, which includes the paying the bills and running the kitchen and everything else. And a very, very busy person with a tremendous responsibility. And he had a really bad day. The morning did not go well. Deliveries didn't make it, and somebody gave him a hard time, and somebody yelled at him. And anybody who's been involved in that sort of thing understands how you could have a not good morning in such a position. And this guy had a really bad morning, and he decided he's going home for lunch, and he was in a sour mood. And everybody knows that when men come home in a sour mood, the one who's going to end up getting it in many cases is going to be the wife. So he was on his way home, and he was in a sour mood, and it wasn't going to be a good scene at home. And as he was walking, he happened to glance up in the Mattersdorf neighborhood here in Yerushalayim. Somebody had hung their laundry out on the front balcony. Their laundry was hanging out to dry, and there was a huge beach towel that was hanging on the line, and this beach towel had a print on it. There were 3 words written on this beach towel. The words were, relax, relax, relax. So he said he saw those words and he felt that it was a divine message that before he gets home, he should relax. So he relaxed and he came, and he said he never saw the towel again either. He never saw that towel again. But it was, you never know when you never know when Hashem is talking about. At least he, maybe his wife, somebody there had the siyata d'shmaya so that the fireworks at the home could be avoided. And I'll just tell you one last one that could be used as a siyata d'shmaya. This is an unbelievable story. I was on my way out of the house. This is also going back probably about 10, 15 years ago. I was on the way out of my house. It was Erev Rosh Hashanah. And I had my machzor, and I was headed down to where I daven the night of the Rosh Hashanah. It was Erev Rosh Hashanah. And as I walked out of the house, there was a man came up to me, a friend of mine from the neighborhood, and he said to me that he had made a mistake one day. There was a bag outside right by the front door. Now, he thought it was a bag of garbage that his wife was waiting for him to take on the way out of the house. He mistakenly, it was actually a bag of baby clothing, good baby clothing that somebody had just given them. And he took this bag and he dumped it in the local dumpster. And then he came home and his wife said, "Oh no, you just dumped the garbage. You dumped the baby's clothing." So he went to the local dumpster, and local dumpster, it was all the way deep inside, and he was waiting for some way to dig that thing out of the local dumpster when a truck pulled up, a small van pulled up, and the guy got out. It was a guy from the neighborhood who happened to be a professional gardener. And he happened to have a rake with him, so he gave this guy the rake to be able to pull. Right at the minute that he was looking for something to be able to pull it out, this guy pulled up with a rake, and he was able to rake the bag out of the garbage. And then he brought it home to his wife. Now, that was just the first part of the siyata d'shmaya. The real siyata d'shmaya was that when I left the house, I was supposed to have taken out the bag of trash with me. So hearing the story from this guy reminded me to scamper on home, Erev Rosh Hashanah, to make sure to take the trash so I won't have anything else to apologize for. The next section of the Haggadah that I would leak a few stories to is the V'hishamda. Everybody I know in every Seder in the house, every Seder in Klal Yisrael, people sing the V'hishamda song, the famous Shweki tune, V'hishamda Lavosenu. And the theme of V'hishamda, at the end it says, Shebechol dor v'dor omni maleinu l'chaloseinu. In every generation our enemies want to destroy us. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam. Hashem saves us from our enemies. Now there's actually a story in the Gemara in Tractate Pesachim on Daf 887a, Pei Zayin Amar Aleph, where one of the minim are various enemies of the Jews, he said to one of the sages, we're very kind to you Jews because, we could, but we don't destroy you. And so I believe it was Rabbi Chadina, if I'm not mistaken, he said back to him, listen, you got a problem. Number one, you can't get to all of us because we've been spread out all over the world. So A, it's just practically not possible for you to destroy us all. B, even if you would, if you would destroy some in one location, people would say to you that you're a government that's lacking, that you're missing one of your pieces. For example, it would be almost the equivalent of one of the states of the United States receding from the Union, and then if instead of having 50 states, it'll be 49. So that's a flaw. And the only reason you don't do it to us is because you practically can't, and you have political considerations because it's going to look bad for you, because you're going to be deficient. You know what he said to him? He used the expression "behonachsinon uvehosalkinon." This is roughly translated what we go to sleep with and what is the thought we wake up with. That means we are constantly thinking about how much we would like to destroy you totally. And so in every generation, we're facing that in every generation. Unfortunately, this year we've seen it practically, but we know that it's always going on, that there's anti-Semitism, and that we're on the, unfortunately, we've always been on the redeeming end, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam. And there's so many ways that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us. I had a Talmud here at Ohr Somayach, he told me, his grandfather was in the Holocaust, and he was doing a job which involved somehow he got whatever work they put him to, whatever type of labor they put him to work at, somehow a small splinter of metal got caught in his thumb. So he went to the infirmary, if it could be called that, and the doctor said to him, look, I can extract this, I have to extract that piece of metal from your thumb, but it's, first of all, you should know it's going to hurt. And second of all, you better not scream, because the Nazi guard outside, if he hears you screaming, he's going to get upset. It's not going to be good for you. So don't scream. Do the best you can. So he started pulling out this piece of metal, and it was excruciating. And at a certain point, a scream escaped his lips. He gave a yell, and sure enough, the Nazi came in. He had a rifle with a bayonet on the end. He took the bayonet, he stuck it in this man's thigh, and he took it and dragged him around the room with this bayonet. And the thigh got infected, and was in danger of a gangrene, and then having to be amputated. And then shortly after, the entire camp cleared out. They went on what was called the death march. So this guy was on the death march with an infected thigh. And at a certain point, he was walking along. People were dropping like flies. At a certain point, he was walking along, and he could not put any more pressure on that thigh. He fell. And he fell right into a pile of bushes, and nobody noticed him. And then most of the people on that death march died. He survived the war, and it was his grandson who told me this story. So sometimes you see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam. It could be in strange ways, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam. There was a young lady also taken from one of the camps, from the ghetto, actually. There's a young lady, a girl, who, for some reason, they took her and they arrested her and they put her in the jail. Her brother, who was very protective of his younger sister, he wasn't not going to have any of it. They walked right into Nazi headquarters, and he said, I want you to free my sister. And that took a lot of nerve, a lot of guts, to a Jew from the ghetto to walk right into the Nazi. And the colonel behind the desk looked at him, and he laughed in his face. And he said, I'll free your sister when hair grows on your palm. So the guy looked the Nazi in the eye, and he opened up his hand, and he showed him he had hair growing on his palm. The Nazi went out of his mind and said, you Jew wizard, you're a sorcerer, get your sister and get her out of here. What had happened was, several years earlier, this man, he had caught his hand in some sort of meat grinder. And the doctors had to do a skin graft. And when they grafted skin onto his palm, they took it from his forearm where there was hair growing. So when he opened up his palm, he showed the Nazi he had hair growing on his palm. The Nazi went berserk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyodam. HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us in the strangest ways. There was in Israel, there was an incident, and I remember this clearly because I remember actually laughing. It was a Tuesday morning, and I opened up. We get a free newspaper on Tuesday mornings, a free Yated Naaman. It was free, after all, and I'm Jewish. And I'm reading this, and there's an item that one of the settlers was driving out in the territories, and some of the Palestinians on a hill started throwing stones at him. So he got out of his car, and he fired a warning shot. And apparently it was too much of a warning shot because he hit one of the Palestinians right in the forehead, and the guy got killed. In Israel, when that happens, when you act in self-defense, if you're Jewish, you could get arrested. That's what part of the unfortunate irony. And so he was arrested. A week later, it was Tuesday morning, I remember because I had a cup of coffee in my hand. I actually started chuckling and I spilled my coffee. A week later, I saw the news item said they have released this settler. Now that's strange that a guy who killed a Palestinian was released so quickly. What turned out was it wasn't his bullet that killed the Palestinian. The Palestinian threw a rock at his speeding car. The rock hit the back tire of the car on an angle that shot it right back at the Palestinian who threw it, hit him right in the forehead, and it killed him. It was the best shot since Dovid killed Goliath with a stone to the forehead. The rock that he threw, attempting to kill the Jew, is the rock that boomeranged, ricocheted, and ended up killing him. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam. The next section is where the Haggadah says, Vayisham legoy melamed shehayu Yisrael mitzuyanim sham. Now the word mitzuyanim generally means they were excellent, and some commentaries say that the contrast between the Jews and the Egyptians showed the excellence of the Jewish people. But V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu, the vayu mitzuyanim sham also means they were clearly distinguishable as Jews. And we know that it says that they did not change their names, their language, and their clothing in spite of the 210 years that they were in Egypt. They were mitzuyanim. They stood out as Jews. And it's important to us to remember we always have to maintain a strong, what we call a Jewish identity, and to realize we're different from the nations, and our behavior is different, and everything about us is different. I have a friend who was raised completely secularly, and he was in a private Catholic school, knew nothing about Judaism. And one day, he got a tap on the shoulder, and one of the students said to him, Goldstein, Bishop Garver wants to see you in his office. Bishop Garver was the principal of the school. So Bishop Garver wants to see you in his office. So Goldstein goes into the office, and Bishop Garver says to him, Goldstein, what's the difference between Maimonides and Nachmanides, which is the Rambam and the Ramban? And Goldstein looks at him and says, sir, I don't know from a Maimon. I have no idea what you're talking about. Bishop Garver reaches into his drawer and he pulls out a translated version of the Ramban in English. And he holds it up and he says, Goldstein, go back to your people. You don't know what you're missing. Goldstein told me that he didn't know what hit him. Didn't know Ramban, didn't Rambam, didn't know anything about Judaism. That line from Bishop Garver triggered off a search. He ended up somehow finding the New Square Hasidim in New York. And from the New Square Hasidim, he then went to Ner Yisrael Yeshiva in Baltimore, where he got smicha. And he told me that when he got married, the head table was occupied by the Skver Rebbe, Rav Yaakov Weinberg Zatzal, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, and Bishop Garver. And he said that of all three of them, Bishop Garber had the most nachas of all. So we have a Jewish identity, and it's important that we maintain it. And for those who can't find it, who don't know it, we have an obligation to try to help them find it. There was a Rav that was walking with a Talmud of his here in Eretz Yisrael many years ago. And as they were walking, he pointed out to a hill. He said, "What do you see on that hill?" Talmud said, "There's a young Arab shepherd, and he's got his sheep." He said, "Let me ask you a question. How old do you think that shepherd boy is?" He says, "I don't know, maybe about 12. Okay, let's say he's 12. How many sheep do you think there are there? He says, "I don't know, maybe 150, 200. He says, "Yeah, I'd say about that. How many hours a day do you think he's out there with the sheep?" He says, "I don't know, 6, 8, 10, 12, I don't know." He says, "Let's say 10 hours a day. He's 12 years old, surrounded by 200 sheep, 10 hours a day. Don't you think that at some point, consider there's only one of him and 200 of them, he should be influenced by the sheep? I would expect him at a certain point to be walking around on his hands and knees, crawling around just like the sheep do. They walk on all fours. I'd expect to see him on all fours. Why isn't it? The answer is because he realizes he's different than them. He's a different species." He said, the Rebbe said to his Talmud, that's what we always have to keep in mind. We're a different species. We cannot allow ourselves to be influenced by the values or the valuelessness of the world around us and bring ourselves spiritually to crawl on all fours like those around us. There was a Jew in Chicago where I grew up who had been through the Holocaust. And he once explained how he survived what happened. He survived the Holocaust. His family was killed. He was on the run. He dressed himself like a Polish peasant. And he would hang around where all the Poles hang around. He was sitting in a bar. And there's another man sidled over to him. And he looked at him. He was a young boy at the time. I think he was 17 years old. This is a somewhat older person. And he turned to him and he said to him in Lashon HaKodesh, he said in Hebrew, "Mode ani." Now this man was nervous because one of the tricks the Nazis used to identify Jews is sometimes they would say something in Hebrew, and if they get a response, they were able to identify a Jew who's on the run and is hiding. So this guy said to him, "Mode ani." So he looked at the guy and he whispered back, "Lifanecha," which is the next word of Mode ani. It turned out that this man was a member of the partisans. That was the way he identified this young man as a Jew. He brought him into the forest with the partisans, and he survived the war. So somebody asked this man, "Weren't you nervous? How were you willing to expose yourself? If he would have been a Nazi, as you said, one word, and that would have cost you your life." He said, "You're right. But when somebody says to me, 'Mode ani,' I say, 'Lifanecha.'" That was the Jewish identity. And Baruch Hashem, the man survived the war. We had here at Ohr Somayach, if you want to see what the influence of a Jew is to maintain that identity. Two young men once came to Ohr Somayach. They were here on a summer program, very similar backgrounds. They came from suburban secular America. They were here for a 3-week program. And one of the boys, Jeff, decided to continue to stay on at Ohr Somayach, whereas Mike decided he's leaving. And Mike was going back to college. Jeff, who was in college, he decided to continue on over here. So one of the staff members said to him, "You guys both came from the same background, basically same secular background. Why did you decide to stay and Mike left?" Jeff answered. He said, I'm secular. My parents are secular. My grandfather was religious. I loved my grandfather, and I used to go to visit him. When I would go to my grandfather's house, he would take me to shul with him. And when he took me to shul, he would wrap me in his tallis. When I walked in to the Beis Medrash here at Ohr Somayach, the smell of the Beis Medrash reminded me of the smell of my grandfather's tallis. And therefore I decided to stay here. One word, one gesture, we never know how we may influence somebody else to help them reconnect to their Jewish identity. Finally, in the Haggadah, we get to Chad Gadya. Chad Gadya, at the end of the Haggadah, Everybody likes to chant Chad Gadya. Some people make the animal sounds, dogs barking, cats, whatever the sounds, imaginative, creative sounds that you make. But the Chad Gadya, there's something puzzling about it. Why is there this almost, it sounds like a child's fairy tale at the end of the Haggadah? What do you call it? You started out with the sheep, the father bought the goat, and then the cat ate the goat, and the dog bit the cat, and then hit the dog, and so on. There's a whole chain here. And eventually he gets to the angel of death, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu came along and he shechts the Malach HaMaves. So there are many different explanations for Chad Gadya. One of the explanations is that it's a reminder to us that whatever we see happening in the world, we have to realize there is some sort of string, chain, call it what you will, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one, he's pulling the strings. So you may see a person who does something to you, he's only being an agent. He's only an agent that was at a situation, a traffic jam, a medical issue. These are all agents. Ultimately, at the top of the pyramid, at the top of the mountain, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, and he's pulling the strings like a marionette, moving things around, what we call Hashgacha Pratis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu surviving, HaKadosh Baruch Hu supervising us. So there was a woman who got up and she spoke in front of an audience of 200 people. These were people who had become Baalei Tshuvas. And she said to them, I want to tell you how I became a Baalei Tshuva. My daughter, a little girl, she was 6 years old. My husband and I were completely secular. And we decided to send her to a Jewish school. We didn't like the situation in the public schools, the various threats and the various lack of values. So we sent her to a Jewish day school. And she came home the first day, little girl was very influential. She said, Mommy, could we keep kosher? And I said, no. Julie, we don't do that. We don't keep kosher. And then the next day she came, Mommy, could you cover your hair? No, Julie, we don't do that. Mommy, could we keep Shabbos? No, Julie, we don't do that. It was Friday afternoon. She said it was late Friday afternoon. And Julie goes to the local store, and she said to the storekeeper, the shopkeeper who knew the local grocery store, he happened to know the family. She said, could I buy 2 Shabbos candles? And she wanted to light her own Shabbos candles. And the shopkeeper knew the family, knew they didn't keep Shabbos. He says, no, you don't mean those, you mean these. And he gave her 2 Yortzeit candles, the little thick candles, because even traditional Jews will often light a Yortzeit candle. And he figured that that's what she wanted. So she does a little girl, she doesn't know the difference. She goes up to her room, and she puts these 2 Yortzeit candles on the ledge, and she lights these candles. And in the meantime, her mother, she hears quiet in the house, and she doesn't know what's her daughter doing, what's she up to. So she goes up to her room, and she opens up the door of her daughter's room late Friday afternoon, and she sees there's her daughter sitting and staring at these 2 Yortzeit candles that she's lit, and they're on her windowsill. And the mother looks at her, she goes, Julie, what are you doing? And Julie's been caught red-handed. She turns around to her mother, and she says, Mommy, it's okay. One is for you, and one is for Daddy. The woman got up and she said, when her daughter said those words, the blood ran cold in her veins. And she thought to herself, perhaps part of herself and her husband is really not alive. And they made a decision then and there that from that point on they're going to be observant. You see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulls the strings that the storekeeper gives the Yortzeit candles, that the daughter lights and the mother comes in. That's the Chad Gadya in our life. The Chad Gadya in our life is HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulling and manipulating the strings. There was an accident in Eretz Yisrael, a traffic accident. And there was a soldier who was on his way home for furlough, and he stopped by at the site of the accident, and he took the victim, one of the victims, put him in his car, drove him quickly to the hospital, and they drove him to the emergency room. The doctors took over. And after the doctors took over, this guy saw everything was under control, and he left. The doctor said to they mentioned, boy, it's a good thing he got here. 10 minutes later, he would have died. In the meantime, once the parents came, everybody showed up. The soldier left, because he saw that everything was under control. The parents of this young man who had been in the accident, 20-year-old boy, who had been in the accident, they felt that they would like to find out who saved their son's life. Now, they owned a little grocery store, and they put up a sign in the grocery store, if anybody knows of the soldier who was on a certain date past the site, brought our son to the hospital, please let us know. And they put up a big sign in their grocery store, and they waited, and it was a year and a half later. A year and a half later, the sign was still in the store. And one day, a woman walked into the store. She took a look at the sign, looked at the date, looked at the story, and she said to the lady behind the counter, I think that might have been my son, because my son told me he was home for the weekend, and he mentioned that he passed the site of an accident, and he told us about that may very well have been it. She called up her son, and sure enough, it turned out it was him. And the lady from the grocery store, she was very grateful. Thank you very much. And then this woman says to her, can I speak to you in the back room for a second? She says, yeah, okay. They go into the back room and nobody's around. She says to the lady behind the counter, I just want to tell you something. This is not the first time we've met. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, I came in here about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was pregnant and I was contemplating having an abortion. You convinced me not to go through with the abortion, to carry, and I had a son. The son that I did not abort because you convinced me was my son, the soldier who saved your son's life. You saved the life, and your son's life was saved as a result. That's the Chad Gadya in our life. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulating the strings. And finally, at the end of the Seder, there was a father and son in a ghetto. And they sat down to the Pesach Seder. Circumstances were not good. And the father and son sat down at the Pesach Seder, and the son said to his father, you know, I'm supposed to ask you 4 questions. I'm going to ask you 6 questions instead. This year I have 6 questions. I said, what are your 6 questions? He said, well, there's a regular 4 questions that we ask at every Seder. And I have 2 more questions. Am I going to be alive next year at the Seder? And are you going to be alive next year at the Seder? And the father said to his son, it's a message we take with us, I don't know if you're going to be alive, and I don't know if I'm going to be alive. But one thing I know is there will be Pesach Seders, and there will be fathers and sons sitting at their Pesach Seder, and the Pesach Seder is going to be celebrated. It'll be celebrated next year and will always be celebrated in Klal Yisrael. Everybody should have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. I hope you find these stories useful, some of them, all of them, part of them, however you want to use them, and everybody should have a very enjoyable Seder.
Hi, this is Peretz Baruch Eichler, a proud alumnus of Ohr Somayach. Now what you just watched is one of the many programs that Ohr Somayach provides, leaving its impact on hundreds of thousands with so many more waiting to be reached. Ohr Somayach's central campus in Jerusalem has over 300 students presently learning there. And now you can be a vital part of spreading that bounty of knowledge worldwide by logging on to donate.ohr.edu. We can step up to the plate at this pivotal moment of Ohr Somayach's growth and bring the next generation of Jews home.